5.
Really?
Okay,
Congratulations. I owe you, God knows what I owe you everything. I owe you the whole world. Okay. Director. Okay.
welcome to the Global Justice Report, an online production of the Center for Global Justice. I'm Cliff Duran, your host for today's program. The Center for Global Justice, El Centro para la Justicia Global, is a multinational and bilingual research center located in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. The center is devoted to research and learning for a better world and empowering a solidarity economy. Since the pandemic, we've discontinued our in-person events and begun these webinars. Our previous revenue-generating programs no longer existing, we now depend on your donations to support these webinars and to be able to continue to pay our Mexican staff. Your donations at www.globaljusticecenter.org will be greatly appreciated. Today's program will delve into some of the influence of the right, the radical right, and its efforts to undermine democracy. Efforts which have been supported by the Koch brothers, among other billionaires, and the ideas on which that is based have been analyzed by Nancy MacLean, who is the author of this important book, Democracy in Chains. If you're not familiar with it, it is highly recommended by myself, and I know there are several others I see here in the Zoom room who are also familiar with it and think highly of it. Unfortunately, we do not have Nancy MacLean with us today. She's writing another book and was too busy with that. But we do have David Schweikert, who's a philosopher and who has followed her thought, as well as the influence of the radical right. And so we will be showing a video of Nancy MacLean's talk, about a 35-minute video that summarizes her ideas. And from that, we will then go to David Schweikert, who will provide his commentary on that. So Roberto, if you're ready, we can start with the video of Nancy MacLean.
Cliff, the video lasts 58 minutes, not 35.
We're just using the 35-minute talk. And when the talk ends, we
Okay.
do not include the Q&A that follows.
All right. All right.
It is really such a pleasure to be with you here tonight and to have this chance with all of you to applaud the great work that Fix Democracy First and the others you're celebrating are doing for our democracy, and also to toast the successes that you're having. This work is both urgent and vital, as I think my remarks will convey. I want to start with a prediction that may surprise you, especially right now this week. And that is that when future historians look back on our moment 30 to 40 years from now and try to make sense of it, I don't think they'll be focusing on Donald Trump. As outrageous as his conduct has been, as much as it absorbs all our attention, as dire as the situation in which it's put us, I actually think that those future historians will be more interested in a quiet transformation underway that the current president's conduct distracts our attention from. I actually think of him as the distractor in chief now. And that is an ingenious, slow takeover by the Koch-led radical right of core branches of our government, starting at the state level in 2010, think Scott Walker in Wisconsin as the opening gun, moving on to the federal courts, Congress, and the executive branch, with assistance from an infrastructure of hundreds of organizations funded by these billionaire and multimillionaire donors who seek to remake our country to their liking by stealth, as I will explain. This anti-democratic infrastructure now includes dozens of ostensibly separate national bodies, such as the Cato Institute, the Heritage Foundation, the American Legislative Exchange Council, the Federalist Society. It also includes 150 state-level organizations whose work is aligned through the State Policy Network, including some here in Washington State. What is it called? The Freedom Foundation. Yes, I usually look these up and I realize I forgot to do that. But yes, that's one of them. And I think there are actually a few more affiliates. It also includes organizing enterprises such as Americans for Prosperity, Concerned Veterans for America, the Libre Initiative, and Generation Opportunity. And it includes colleges and centers at colleges and universities around the country, with George Mason University, which I wrote about as the flagship, but faculty at over 300 American colleges and universities now getting funding from the Charles Koch Foundation alone. And as those future historians who look back on our era tell the incredibly inspiring story of the 11th hour organizing that stymied this billionaire's bid for control, because we're not going to let this thing happen, right? Nobody in this room is going to let this thing happen. As they tell the story of the organizing that came together to stop this, they will, I must admit, have to credit the genius of the Koch long game. They will trace how Koch's quiet focus on trying to destroy the power of the strongest barriers to success in this project, education unions top among them, while radically altering the rules of the political process, together enabled the progression of this stealth takeover to the point we see today, which no one on our side would have imagined possible in 2008. And I think it's really important to go back and remember how you felt after the election and the inauguration of President Obama, because that is the measure of the success of this network, the fights that we're engaged in now that we never anticipated. So my research exposes how this happened and why, and it also explains what the ultimate endgame of this Koch network is and what it will mean for the vast majority, who will be devastated if this Koch project succeeds. This network aims to, of course, destroy labor unions and privatize our public schools and stop action on climate change and much more. But you will see, I think, that its ultimate agenda is much more radical than that, and you'll see that as I go along. So I won't summarize the narrative that anchors my book's arguments here, but I will tell you this, that the story starts in 1956 when the state of Virginia was leading the wider white South in what they called massive resistance to Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court decision that mandated the desegregation of public education. This program of massive resistance provided tax-funded vouchers for segregated private schools beyond the reach of the courts. It required the closure of schools that planned to desegregate, and it took away the First Amendment rights of the NAACP. It forever undermined public education in the South. And the school closures in Prince Edward County, Virginia were one aspect of that, and that's actually how I picked up this story, where they closed schools for 5 years and left black children with no formal education whatsoever, while white students went off to private segregation academies with tax-funded vouchers. So we tend to remember that fight, that era of massive resistance, as the last gasp of Jim Crow. But it turns out that it was also the first big opportunity for the cause of free market fundamentalism, what some people call neoliberalism, to gain a mass audience among those recalcitrant whites of the South. And the founders of the free market fundamentalist cause took advantage of this opportunity. They flocked to the state of Virginia's side in the contest, thrilled at the possibility of getting tax subsidies for private schools. Of that crucible of my story, I will only say one more thing now, and that is that the author, Maya Angelou, was right when she said, "When people show you who they are, believe them the first time." Because it turns out that what we're seeing today, now, in Donald Trump's America, is not the first time the libertarian right has leveraged white supremacy to advance an otherwise unpopular agenda. What I want to convey to you tonight, though, is not that foundational moment, but rather what I see as the value added of my research for people like you who are dealing daily with the impact of the strategy that I stumbled on by chance while researching that Virginia story. And I will state my case plainly. It is that the right has been winning over the last decade like never before and with continuing velocity because the Koch network has effectively weaponized the ideas of a figure who is little known to most people, but who supplied the crucial ideas that are in play on the political right now, much as Milton Friedman's ideas were in play in an earlier era. This figure's name was James McGill Buchanan. If you've never heard of him, don't feel bad. I hadn't either when I started this, but he was the first U.S. Southerner to win the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences in 1986 for work that he started during that Southern schools crisis. He called his approach public choice economics, and he billed it as presenting an economic analysis of politics. But as I found in the archives, its real mission was political from the outset. Its aim was to discredit government action, to convince us of the idea that government would always fail, so that there would be no trusted alternative to rule by the market, and so that they could help to protect the interests of the so-called makers from the so-called takers. Today's right, I learned, is using a playbook derived from Buchanan's ideas to undermine the collective power on which good public policy depends, and then to rig the rules in their own favor at every step. As Charles Koch put it in a donor summit last year, he said, very pridefully, "We have made more progress together over the last 5 years than I was able to make in the previous 50. So he's been at this a very long time and feels like it's going quite well now. By following these ideas from their origins in civil rights era Virginia to the present, I think we gain at least 3 important resources. First of all, we gain a deep understanding of the Koch network's operational strategy, including how it might be blunted. And here I can refer you to this. I had no role in setting this up, but you can see here, with knowledge, we can rule the galaxy. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one is that we gain a history that exposes why this radical right adopted a stealth strategy, and this is crucial. It is the really encouraging thing, if in a funny way, but that was precisely because its architects, Buchanan, Koch, and others, knew that the vast majority would stop their plan if they became aware of where all this was heading, because the vast majority does not want the society they will try to bring into being. And third, we gain knowledge of what it is that they are trying to do, what the ultimate Koch endgame is. And that endgame, which they wisely don't announce to the rest of us, is an incredibly radical transformation of our governing institutions, our legal system, and even our social and ethical norms. Its purpose is to, in time, force, to impose total personal responsibility on the people. It would do this by undercutting our capacity to do the kinds of things that citizens have looked to government for help with for generations now, from providing for public education and public health, to retirement security, workers' rights, anti-discrimination law, environmental protection, and more. This will give you some sense of the agenda these folks are collectively pursuing. The Koch donor network, in short, as my book title suggests, from using Buchanan's, some of his own words, seeks to enchain democracy. The plan is, over time, to bind our political institutions in such a way as to make government unable to comply with the will of the people, at least where the will of the people involves tax transfers and government regulation, which is basically most of what we look to government to do. So what we are seeing, and I think this is crucial to understand, is far more than partisan. This is not about D's versus R's. This is not even about liberals and conservatives in the old way. This is something new and different. It is a messianic plan, decades in the making, to fundamentally change the relationship between the people and our government, and to do so permanently in a manner that aims to pin the proverbial pendulum to the right so that it cannot swing back again. To grasp why having this plan of action matters, let me quote the head of Koch Industries Government and Public Affairs Operation, a man named Mark Holden, gloating to a donor summit in late 2015. He said, "We're close to winning. They don't have the real path. They don't have the real path." He was referring to journalistic critics and advocate critics of the Koch network, but he might as well have been speaking of the rest of us because we didn't have the real path either. I believe I found that real path through my research, by serendipity. That's a whole nother story. But it starts with gaining control over an ever-growing number of states, now 30. It then moves through those state legislatures to choke to alter the rules of the political process in each one in a way that can ultimately choke progressive national policy too. And among the pivotal changes are these, and I can tell you this as a resident of North Carolina, where I saw this unfold right in front of my eyes, and I had also gone to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin that was being transformed by Scott Walker in the same way at the same time. So among the changes are these: the most sophisticated and radical gerrymandering we've ever seen in the history, in our political history, in order to misrepresent the will of the electorate. Hamstringing labor unions, especially teachers' unions, which are the largest and most progressive in today's America. Undermining other strong liberal lobbies, such as Planned Parenthood. And then, with these core defenders of democracy weakened, the strategy moves on to the next phase, with voter suppression, privatization of public resources to alter power relations, preemption by state legislatures of local progressive wins. I understand that you face some of this here in Washington too. Attempts to undermine the independence of the state judiciary and more. And I can tell you that some of the things you're fighting for, we had won in North Carolina until these folks came into power and took them away. So what is this real path driving toward? The ultimate radical rules change. Altering the U.S. Constitution at the first and only state-convened constitutional convention in our history since 1787. The goal is to amend the Constitution in a manner that would curtail most of what progressive social movements have achieved not just since the 1930s, not just since the 60s or the 1930s, but going all the way back to the 1910s. This will sound impossible, I am sure, but while we have all been distracted by the president and his daily tweet storms and all the other outrages coming from the White House, the Koch network, working through ALEC and allied state officials in the states they now control, have been quietly lining up authorizations for this convention. And in fact, Wisconsin's outgoing Scott Walker, who lost a job in 2018, thanks to the voters, had to find new work, and so he was recently named honorary chairman of one of the organizations pushing for such a constitutional convention. And consider this, again, while we have all been fixated on this president, that I now think of as the distractor in chief, they have been lining up these authorizations steadily one after another. They now have the backing of 28 of the 34 states needed for the first ever constitutional convention in our history. Some background on this: Article 5 of the US Constitution provides two routes to amendment. One, through the process that you're proposing and with others rightly for a constitutional amendment against Citizens United, the old style where you have lots of public deliberation and it gets aired well and goes through, and if it's supported, becomes part of the Constitution. The other route in Article 5 is so radical it has never been tried, because any such convention would be, by definition, a runaway convention, but it's happening. So what kind of a country would the libertarian dream Constitution create? James Buchanan laid it out. It would look a lot like America in 1900, a place where workers had no legal right to organize for collective voice, a place where corporations were free of democratic accountability, whether for consumer protection, discrimination, or pollution, a place where the Supreme Court thought that mass voter suppression was just fine. Needless to say, a place with no Social Security or Medicaid or Medicare, and more. This vision is so reactionary that Karen Flynn of Common Cause has rightly warned that they seek to roll back the 20th century. But here we hit another puzzle, which is that not even the voters who have been so unflaggingly loyal to the current president would want to live in such a country. Without Medicare, without Social Security, without clean air and water? No. So how exactly could the Koch-led right believe it could carry out such a transformation in a democracy, as flawed as ours is in some ways? And this is where my research brings something new to the table and something unique. Because I found through this research that the operational strategy that Charles Koch and his field generals have come up with to surmount this rather considerable obstacle depends on stealth. It proceeds through a series of what Koch himself has called interrelated plays, integrated incremental changes that build on one another in a cumulative manner, so that this cause never has to inform the people of what the true end game is, or even be honest with us about the purpose of each play that moves the overall project closer to its destination. Koch himself puts his method this way. He says, "I often think of what we do as stonemasonry. Once a stone has been carefully selected and set, it shapes a new space in which the mason can set yet another well-chosen stone. Each stone is different, but they all fit together to create a framework that is mutually reinforcing." Think back to Scott Walker's Act 10 that took away collective bargaining rights for public sector workers that he never campaigned on, but said this is our moment to change history to his team. That was the perfect first stone, dishonestly packaged as a budget repair bill. Other aspects of the misinformation, the stealth on which this project relies: climate science denial. The Koch network is one of the top promoters of climate science denial, besides the fossil fuel companies themselves, in the world. The myth of mass voter fraud, which strategically leverages racism in order to convince white people, essentially, that there's a problem, and that's why you must have this legislation to restrict access to voting. Why stealth? I think this is the single most important finding of my research, that these folks know from repeated historical experience that the majority would never knowingly support their true vision, and that elected officials who are accountable to the people will not carry it out. To understand how radical they are, you need to know that Ronald Reagan was a terrible disappointment to them from his first year in office, because he did not walk the plank to the degree that they wanted to in his first budget. Instead, he ran up the deficit because he didn't want to be unpopular. Goes on, George W. Bush, same thing, gave seniors a prescription drug benefit. No elected official who is accountable to the people will carry out this agenda. That's why they have to radically change the rules. As Charles Koch said when he launched this effort in earnest, since we are greatly outnumbered, the failure to use our superior technology ensures failure. By technology, he was referring to the ideas that he found in the school of thought developed by James Buchanan, a way of thinking that has since become widespread on the political right, even as it's barely known outside the right. One of Buchanan's greatest gifts to the right was this advice, which he delivered over and over again. He said, if you don't like the outcome of the political process over a long period of time, stop focusing on who rules and start concentrating on the rules and how to change them to get what you want. Because the fact is, the radical corporate right, we may forget it now, but they were losing the battle badly in the 1990s. The Cold War had ended between the US and the USSR. Even George Herbert Walker Bush was talking about the peace dividend and how that might be applied to all these bottled up domestic purposes. Global warming was coming into discussion with a sense that we needed to act on this great threat to us, to our planet. New voters were entering the process through the Motor Voter Registration Act and the organizing of groups like ACORN and so forth. And it was then, in 1997, that Charles Koch got serious and got determined. It was then that he gave his first $10 million to Buchanan's Center at George Mason University, where he has since become the top donor and weaponized whole parts of the university to advance this agenda. He made it clear with his first gift just how ambitious his vision was. Koch said, "I want to unleash the kind of force that propelled Columbus to his discoveries." We have all felt that since, as the organizations and elected officials backed by the Koch network have engaged in systematic radical rules change that has brought us to the current crisis. We have felt that force in the transformation of the Republican Party, using the threat of primary challenges from the right and the lure of dark money cash as a reward for compliance in a kind of pincers play that has made Republican elected officials carry out the radical right donor agenda as opposed to even what Republican voters want, and they boast about this at Koch network meetings. Mark Holden again calls the accountability play, this pincers action, our secret sauce, so to speak. We've seen that force also in how the Koch network, having harnessed a major party to its purposes, then turned Buchanan's public choice thought into a step-by-step strategy to transform our country into a place none of us would recognize and very few of us would want to live. In Washington, we saw the force, that force in the brinkmanship the Republican Party, thus transformed, applied to make sure that citizens not be given any new reason to believe in government. Not the Affordable Care Act, not card check for labor unions, not immigration reform, not action on climate change, and not common sense gun laws. And lo and behold, since the inauguration of Donald Trump, the Koch wish list is being granted with epic speed on almost every front. One administration official gloated just 2 weeks ago at a meeting with oil and gas corporations, and I quote, "One of the things I have found absolutely thrilling in working for this administration is the president has a knack for keeping the attention of the media and the public focused elsewhere while we do all the work that needs to be done." So, what does all of this mean for people like those in this room who are deeply committed to democracy reform, who are deeply committed to having a responsive, transparent government that can carry out the will of the people? If we have this Koch battle plan, if we know where it's coming from, if we understand how radical and dangerous that real end game is, what are the implications for what we do? I'll highlight just a few in closing because, again, We're not going to let them win, right? I have seen this all over the country over the last 2 years. People are getting this. People are really getting this, and it is exciting to be part of the process of witnessing this. But so let me highlight a few things. Well, first of all, I would also say the 2018 midterms, what a promissory note on what can be done when people start to get it and start to organize. And in terms of tonight's agenda, and this has already been mentioned, but everywhere that democracy reform was on the ballot in 2018, everywhere it won. People are hungry for this kind of democracy reform. And that's important because I think one lesson we can take from this Koch network project and the impact that it's had is that just taking stands on single issues, even critical issues like job creation and healthcare or climate action, will no longer work as it once did, because our political system has been so upended and deformed and distorted by this corporate radical right. That means that democracy reform must become a key focus of every progressive organization's work, as must alerting the public to the profound danger our democracy is in, and not just from Donald Trump. As a nurse reader of the book put it in a letter to me, she said, "I realize now that this president is the tumor, not the cancer." Yes. The cancer that enabled this acute crisis and that helped someone so unfit and so dangerous get into the highest office in this land, the cancer is the chronic problems that have allowed the Koch strategy to get as far as it has. The escalating inequality in our society, which is more egregious than in any other society in the world, to the point where most Americans don't even understand how profound the inequality is, that has made it so that Charles and David Koch, if they were one person, they would be the richest person in the world who is doing this. So the inequality, the dark money in politics that comes from those huge levels of inequality, from people who don't even understand how the rest of the citizenry lives. Obstacles to voter participation, which are much more egregious in our country than in others, in most other democracies. We should be ashamed of how hard we make it for people to participate. The gerrymandering that lets elected officials choose their voters rather than voters choosing their elected officials. The radical changes in legal rules and Supreme Court rulings and more. To say nothing of the Electoral College. So as a historian who has studied the Koch plan and a specialist in the history of social movements who's thought long and hard about all this, I have to tell you that I truly believe that the only way to get out of this acute crisis and to make sure we never face anything like this again is deep structural reform of the rules of government. Here in this room, you know the kinds of measures we need. We need reform to stop the flow of corporate money to political candidates, dirty money in many cases. We need to make it much easier for people to vote, as the Cook County Board of Elections is, and things like automatic voter registration could do. We need to systematically rebuild countervailing power to the extreme wealth like the Koch donor network, union power, community power, the power of organized citizens coming together for shared purposes. As some activists are putting it, and I really love this phrase, and I think the people who were awarded tonight, their organizations are practicing this, we need to work on democracy beyond elections, on year-round enhanced organization and representation of the people. And we have to unrig the law and the courts that have been so systematically distorted by infusions of money from the political radical right since the 1970s. Charles Koch boasts that he provided the seed money for the Federalist Society. He's a continuing donor. If you want to look at our Supreme Court majority now, that is the measure of the impact of this money in politics. And it is to the right of the Roberts rulings are to the right of 90% of the citizenry, including most Republicans at this point. So Here, though, is the kind of fun irony that history is full of. And I have to tell you, I love my area of work because I think it's also, at least studying social movements, it's kind of an antidepressant at difficult times because you can look back to other times. Like if we think we have a steep climb, go study the abolitionists for a day or two and read about what they were facing, right? We have so many resources behind us, so much talent, so much potential, and we have an interesting, ironic situation in that in trying to take away our shared toolkit of a responsible, accountable, transparent democracy that could do the people's work, the Koch network may have done for us what we have been so unable to do for ourselves for so long. That is to help us realize how much we all have in common, the vast majority, how much we need one another to preserve our shared values, our past victories, and to save our common planet. So I will actually, even though I know my story is racing and chilling, but remember, knowledge is power. I will end with hope because there is so much to justify this hope. All around the country, people are realizing that this is an all-hands-on-deck moment for the defense of democracy in this country. We are seeing this across sectors, from labor union members to environmentalists, from civil rights activists to good government groups, from feminists to retirees who don't want to see the world ruined for their grandchildren. You can see it in the teachers' mobilizations that have swept the country in states like my own North Carolina, West Virginia, Oklahoma, Arizona, etc. You see it in Black Lives Matter. You see it in the Women's March. You see it in the growth of indivisible and resistance groups. You see it among the Parkland students in their March for Our Lives. And you see it in the outraged reactions to family separations at the border. You can see this reaction building, this demand building in the House Bill 1, a promissory note on the kind of sweeping reforms we need to fix our democracy first, to ensure voting rights, campaign finance reform, a crackdown on lobbying, etc. And you can see it in your own state from the work that you are all doing. I will say this in closing. This shared sense of urgency among all of the people who are getting active on these issues now, whether they've been in this work for decades, as some have, or whether they just, the day after Election Day in 2016, started to look around and didn't like what they saw, wherever they're coming to this from, they are starting to realize that we cannot just keep doing the same things in the same way and expect better results. We have to step up our game. We, too, have to begin to think long-term about the kind of society that we want to live in and how we're going to bring it into being. We, too, must build power at the state level, not just the local level and not just the national level. The state level is where the right got so much power to wreak this transformation. We, too, must work to change the national conversation about government. We, too, must pay attention to the judiciary and to setting it right. And to do all this well, we have to reach beyond our silos and make the kinds of alliances we need to reclaim the future and to walk together to do that. We must, in short, reform democracy to save it. Thank you. Thank you. Great to be with you.
Well, thank you, Nancy McLean, for that guest appearance. Glad to have you with us. And now let me turn to David Schweikert for his comments. Okay, David, unmute yourself.
Okay, well, got a lot to say, but let me say it's truly an honor to be listed as a co-presenter at this Center for Global Justice event with Nancy MacLean. Somewhat misleading since she's a video presence, but I'm here live, but I'm more than happy with this arrangement. For many years, I've said that the book from the 19th century that had most affected me, most changed my worldview was Karl Marx's Capital. I've never gotten over the impact of that book, nor over a book I read a few years later. What I now think of as the most influential book of the 20th century, it's certainly for me, and that was Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. 3 years ago, I read the most impactful book of the 21st century for me so far, Nancy MacLean's Democracy in Chains. Until reading that book, I had no idea that there was a radical right stealth plan for America, nor how advanced it was, nor how searingly destructive. Now, for over a decade, I'd been saying that the capitalist class should be worried, that the complacency following the collapse of the Soviet Union is no longer warranted. I've often said if I were a member of the capitalist class, I would be worried, although living in their wealth bubbles, they didn't seem to be. And so let me see if I can do a PowerPoint because I got a lot of stuff here. Okay, start from the very beginning. Okay. If I remember the capitalist class, I'd be worried about the explosive inequality since the mid-70s brought to public attention by the Occupy movement slogan, the 1% versus the 99%. The Great Recession, which all our trusted neoclassical economists had assured us could no longer happen, did. And although the stock market has recovered, famously, wages haven't. Climate Change. A best-selling book is published in 2014, highly praised by its New York Times reviewer, who stated boldly on its back cover, "Forget everything you think you know about global warming. The really inconvenient truth is not about carbon, it's about capitalism."
David, we
Yeah.
do not see your screen share, your PowerPoint.
Oh, you don't see the PowerPoint?
No.
Oh, no. Okay, well, let's see what I can do about that. Got to get back to you guys. Let's see, go over to Zoom. Okay, here. No, join a meeting. Whoops.
Now you're still here.
Yeah. Okay, now here I am. Okay, let's see. So the screen share. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't click that. Okay, I think this is it. Okay, here it is. Okay.
There you go.
Join the meeting. I hope, well, can I just cancel? I'm already here. No, I don't want to leave the meeting. Wait a minute. Cancel.
Just cancel that.
It's going to just go down. Okay. All right. Well, I could back up one. This is what I've just said. I thought you were seeing. Okay. Turns out I was not wrong about the capitalist concerns. What I was completely wrong about is the thinking that the capitalist class is disorganized, pulled in contradictory directions, each member pursuing its own self-interest. Nancy MacLean turned my thinking upside down. Her research uncovered, in her words, the utterly chilling story of the ideological origins of the single most powerful and least understood threat to democracy today, the attempt by the billionaire-backed radical right to undo the democratic governance. I now see her book as the centerpiece of a trifecta of must-read books. Interestingly, all written by women on what must be the most important issue of our times, the one that threatens our survival, not only democracy, but of our species, all, as I say, written by women. Jane Mayer's Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right, Nancy MacLean's Democracy in Chains, Ann Nelson's Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. I began reading Mayer's book shortly after it came out, but somehow got distracted. I returned to it recently. It is disturbing, but I didn't at the time realize how serious a threat to our democracy the radical right posed. Obama was then our president, and so I wasn't so worried about that. The latter book I just finished reading, it's summarized by MacLean on her blurb on the back cover of this book, This is Ann Nelson's book. How Fundamentalists Made Their Peace with Mammon, the NRA, the Environmental Catastrophe would be the subtitle of this riveting story. Shadow Network abounds with the startling revelations, not the least about this alliance's ties to the Koch brothers and its cynical takeover of media networks in hard-pressed parts of the country that wield outsized power in the US Senate, the Electoral College. Want to know how so many Americans turned against the truth? Read this book. Okay, quick outline of the radical right stealth plan. Okay, organize the wealthy via donor conferences. Oh, I got saying low resource. Okay. Create a network of organizations to develop and promote libertarian corporate conservative ideas and implementation strategies. I thought this should be all. It's not working, but that's okay. I had it so it's coming in place. Form an alliance with the Christian evangelicals, form an alliance with the National Rifle Association, create alternative medias. Oh, I see what it is. Let me try to get this straightened out. There we go. This is better. Okay. Organize the wealthy via donor conferences, create a network of organizations, develop, promote libertarian, corporate, conservative ideas, policies, form an alliance with the Christian evangelicals. Ann Nelson has a lot to say about that. It's not just the Koch brothers. The Bradley Foundation is a big player here. Form an alliance with the National Rifle Association. He's got a chapter on that too. Create an alternative media network, newspaper, television, talk radio, and online sources. Reconfigure academia. Gain control of the political system. How do you do the latter? Well, capture the state legislatures, the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC. Highly recommended book on the subject, Alexander Hertzel Fernandez, State Capture, How Conservative Activists, Big Business, and the Wealthy Donors Reshaped the American States and the Nation. Capture the Judiciary from their webpage. The Federalist Society is created by these people. The society is a membership organization. The student division includes more than 10,000 law students at all of the 204 ABA accredited law schools in the United States. The lawyers division is comprised of over 65,000 legal professionals and other interested in current intellectual and practical developments. And of course, of the current 9 members of the Supreme Court, 6 of the, okay, and I'll say, I didn't fill in it right. 6 of the 9 are current or former members of the organization. Supreme Court. Everyone on Trump had a list of 25. Every one of those had been associated with the Federalist Society. Take over the Republican Party. McLean talked about that a bit. Create the Tea Party, and then any Republican that doesn't follow the line, follow the script, primary them. Turn out your base, get rid of them. So they all have to line up. And ultimately, she says, change the Constitution so as to lock in permanently their objectives. Okay. How will this be paid for? Okay. Well, mostly through donations, which is not a problem anymore, given the massive amount of money in the pockets of those at the top. One recent report came out last June, shows that the top 1% of Americans have about 16 times more wealth than the bottom 50%. Another one this October notes that there are now 745 billionaires in the United States with a combined wealth of $5 trillion. The 3 top have more wealth than the bottom 50%. Now, it's hard to wrap your head around these numbers sometimes. So I got a kind of a way of thinking about what wealth looks like. Suppose we have you have the median wealth, which is $100,000 median. So you've got half the country has less than that. Half has more and are 6 feet tall. Let the heights be proportional to wealth. Well, then a millionaire will be 10 times taller than you, 60 feet tall, about the height of a 6-story building. a billionaire will be 1,000 times taller because a billion is 1,000 times more than a million. He'll be 60,000 feet. His head would be up in the clouds more than 10 miles above you. The average wealth of the top 745 billionaires is 6.7 billion. So a billionaire's average height is 67 miles. And the tallest of all at last report is Elon Musk. His 320 billion puts him at the height of 32,000 miles, which is more than 5 times taller than Mount Everest, the highest physical point on our planet. If Elon should lay down with his head in Boston, his butt would crush Denver and his head would rest, his head would rest in Los Angeles. I got it heading backwards. His feet would rest in Los Angeles. So that's what wealth looks like. There's no problem in funding these hundreds of organizations out there. Now, the focus of my most recent research on this has really been on academia itself, So why is the radical right concerned so much about academia? Well, all those students saddled in debt. The average student loan debt now for those who graduated this year was $40,000. In 1975, it was 1,000, which adjusted for inflation would be 5,000 today, i.e. student debt per student is 8 times higher than it was then. College degrees no longer guarantee stable, reliable, well-paid employment. The prospects are worse, of course, without a college degree, but the effect of a college degree is nothing like it once was. All those non-tenured track faculty now doing most of the undergraduate teaching, yet often making near poverty level incomes. In 1975, 2/3 of all undergraduate teaching was done by tenured or tenured track faculty. Now it's 1/3. All those undergraduates being turned into socialists. There's a couple of recent polls. Most Americans still think positively of capitalism, but it's changing among young adults. According to an Axios Momentum survey released on Friday, adults ages 18 to 34 are almost evenly split between those who view capitalism positively and those who view it negatively. Those numbers have changed significantly over the last 2 years, when 20 percentage points separated those who viewed capitalism positively from those who did not. Among adults aged 18 to 24, capitalism is in even deeper trouble. 42% say they have a positive view, and 54% do not. What is to be done? Okay, from the Koch perspective, cut public funding for higher education, forcing colleges to be more tuition driven, hence compelling them to add special facilities to attract prospective students, hence going deeper into debt, hence more dependent on donor funding and thus more sensitive to parental or student complaints about things that make the donors unhappy. Expose left-leaning faculty, go after the tenured radicals. Many of us remember how back in the 1990s, figures like Peter Collier, David Horowitz, and Roger Kimball began out denouncing tenured radicals, publishing such books as The Destructive Generation, Second Thoughts About the 60s, Tenured Radicals, How Politics Has Corrupted Our Highest Education. That's Kimball. 2006, Horowitz published his updated version of The Professors, the 101 Most Dangerous Academics. Now, by the way, in those days, just to add a little bit here, at the time, this all seemed rather trivial to most tenured professors, myself among them. After all, what did it matter? We had tenure after all. I remember feeling somewhat envious of those who did make the 101 list, but I didn't. Neither did Cliff, but Harry did. Okay, so the strategy shifts. You're not going to just call out tenured professors and everything happen. But be sure that tenured radicals, when they're retired, are not replaced by like-minded professors. My case in point, despite the fact that I had high enrollments in my undergraduate course, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, and high turnout for my graduate seminars in Marxism, everyone sort of knew that it was well understood that any job description mentioning Marxism or socialism would never get the approval of upper administration. The shift in the balance of power between faculty and administrators over the past several decades has been enormous. Faculties don't determine who's going to replace tenured professors. Ultimately, the administrators do. Okay, then go after the untenured adjunct radicals. Make sure they're identified by funding such organizations as Turning Point USA, which sponsors the professional watch list. Then take action. And I'm going to say more about that, or I'm going to have more to say about this later on, but let me just go on. From their webpage, by the way, the mission of Professor Watch List is to expose and document college professors who discriminate against conservative students and advance leftist propaganda in the classroom. The positive strategy by the radical right: recruit students to the cause. Provide funding to universities for freedom institutes on campuses, which can offer 4-credit courses to students, bringing in outside speakers and so on. There's an organization called Uncoke My Campus, which has some information on that, the numbers of places. Got it here somewhere. Yeah, you got Utah State, the Eccles Institute for Economic and Quantitative Analysis. You've got Utah State's Institute for Political Economy. You got Duke University Center for the History of Political Economy, Middle Tennessee Political Economy Research Institute, Arizona State, the Institute for Justice, and who can be against that? And so on. There's a whole list of these, that are actual institutes, and they're really bizarre because I saw the contract for one of them. The institutes, they come in, they fund it, they build a building, they get to offer 4-credit courses to students, and they have a determination on what faculty get hired to teach those students. So it's really, a disturbing phenomenon, which is why Uncoke Our Campus is primarily, as Middle Tennessee State University started that, get these institutions off our campus. Then help set up libertarian student organizations on campus to recruit as many students as possible to the cause. Offer students internships to a large number of libertarian think tanks and possible employment opportunities. So students, become a libertarian, you don't have to worry about a job anymore. You can, always get hired by a libertarian think tank. There are so many of them out there now, and they got so much money. Create an academic counterintelligentsia. Offer economic grants to the best and brightest libertarian students, encouraging them to pursue graduate degrees that will enable them to become college teachers. Make substantial donations to universities that hire their people. Hire a libertarian, you're going to get a nice contribution coming in from some of the big donors. Engage in bulk purchase of books written by their people to be published by highly regarded academic publishers to ensure they will be granted tenure and continue publishing, thus enhancing their academic reputation. I don't have the documentation for that, but it is amazing. These books that hardly anyone would read get published by Princeton University Press, Oxford University Press, Johns Hopkins University Press, on and on and on, and they are obviously selling. And then create endowed chairs at universities to be filled with their people with suitable qualifications. So, for example, the libertarian Jason Brennan got hired by Georgetown. Georgetown wound up getting $30,000 in contributions. They didn't have anything before Brennan was hired. So that may be it. Okay, let's see what I got here. Oh, well, okay. Actually, I meant to put this part in before, but we'll do it. McLean called our attention to the Lewis Powell about academia generally. In 1971, prior to being appointed by Richard Nixon as to the Supreme Court, Lewis Powell was commissioned by the United States Chamber of Commerce, a longstanding private organization dedicated to protecting the interest of business, to write a confidential memorandum to be entitled Attack on the American Free Enterprise System. Powell took to his task. His memorandum called on wealthy business interests to get organized. He warned that the American economic system is under broad attack. He alerted his audience. The most disquieting voices join the chorus of criticism, come from perfectly respectable elements of society, from the college campus, the intellectual and literary journals, the arts and science. This was back in 1971. Powell advocated constant surveillance of textbook content, as well as a purge of left-wing elements. That was 1971 rather. Its effect is being felt even more strongly today. As you know, a sustained, well-financed attack now underway. See, do I have anything on this? Whoops, not quite. Sorry. Keep that in mind. Sustained, well-financed attack now underway, usually including disinformation on the teaching of critical race theory. 7 states now have bans on teaching critical race theory: Arkansas, Florida, Idaho, Iowa, New Hampshire, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and with more bans moving through 21 state legislatures. The explicit attack on college faculty. Last Tuesday, November 2nd, J.D. Vance, author of the best-selling Hillbilly Elegy and now candidate for the U.S. Senate in Ohio, gave a keynote speech at the National Conservatism Conference entitled, "The Universities Are the Enemy." In the speech, he told his audience, "I think in this moment of national conservatism, what we need is more than inspiration. What we need more than inspiration is wisdom." And here, there is wisdom in what Richard Nixon said approximately 40 to 50 years ago. He said, and I quote, "The professors are the enemies." Here's a question worth pondering. If the capitalist class is worried then in 1971, when Powell wrote his amendments, a period of large anti-Vietnam War movement and proliferation of a wide variety of openly Marxist organizations, Leninists, Trotskyists, Maoists, and all attracting student activists, why are they even more worried today? Well, that's the part, I already told you about, all the students in debt and so on and so forth. So I think, I got, sorry, I got this all screwed up here. So I was going to close by giving the example, of one of these tenured persons that are getting all the money and everything, Jason Brennan, but I probably won't do that. What I want to do is introduce a piece from, and I got to figure out how to get out of here. A radio show I heard a while ago. Let's see, it should be on here. Here we go. All right, this is This American Life. Ira Glass, narrates this every week. And here is a very interesting show. I'll do the first 10 minutes of this, which sets it up. It'll give you some sense of what's going on college campuses now. Can you hear it?
No.
Oh, no, you can't?
No.
Oh, Cliff, can you set it up? You got the link too, right?
Yeah, okay. If you take that link down or that screen share down, I'll try to do it.
Oh, let's see. What I do? Oh boy, I don't know how to. Oh, come on. How do I get out of this? Scroll, new share. Okay, pause. Let's see. Went through this before. Couldn't figure out how to stop it. Oh, here it is. Stop the share. Okay, there's the stop share.
Okay. Well, now maybe I can share what you were. Let me try to do it for you then.
Okay.
Quick warning to everybody who's listening to this podcast version of our show. There are some words that we have unbeeped. If you don't want to hear that, maybe you're listening with kids, you can get
I
a
think that's
beeped
better.
version at our website, thisamericanlife.org. Zoe Chase,
Yes, Ira Glass.
you brought some tape to play.
Yeah, I brought some tape from this trip that I was on recently.
Zoe Chase is one of the producers of our program. It's This American Life from WBEZ Chicago.
So on this trip, I was in an interesting room.
Couple ground rules. There will be no safe spaces, no trigger warnings, no microaggressions. We're gonna have some honest discussion here.
We're in a huge auditorium surrounded by more than 2,000 conservative college students. It's a bunch of young people in sports coats and ties and dresses and heels.
And the media has said, oh, there's no young conservatives out there. You know, you have to be liberal if you're in college. And every single one of you here today, from all 50 states, by the way, are here to tell the media, colleges, and the elites that our generation will not embrace socialism.
This is Charlie Kirk, and this room is at a big conference he's throwing. Charlie Kirk's organization is called Turning Point USA, kind of a pumped-up version of the College Republicans, is how I describe it. And they recruit and train conservative students to be conservative activists on their campuses. Charlie, he's 24, he's preppy, he still technically lives in his parents' house outside Chicago.
Technically means
That's his domicile, but he's on the road more than 300 days out of the year. He founded this group something like 5 years ago. They have a ton of money from conservative donors. This year, they're going to have a budget close to $14 to $15 million. Someone close to the organization told me. It took place in a really fancy hotel right near Mar-a-Lago, actually.
The son of the President of the United States, Donald Trump Jr.
Wait, Donald Trump Jr. was there?
Yeah, Charlie Kirk, the head of the organization, and Donald Trump Jr. are friends. So this conference, it's premised on the idea that there's an important battleground right now in America that conservatives are losing. They've been losing this battle for years. That's college campuses. College campuses overrun by liberal bias. Conservatives feel embattled. They feel outnumbered.
Now, this is nothing new, conservatives saying this.
True. And the Koch brothers and other conservative donors are throwing millions of dollars at this. To change our politics, they want to change our culture. To change the culture, you have to change universities. And the speakers at this conference, they make it sound like this is a life or death moment.
We are in a nonviolent, and I pray to God it remains nonviolent, civil war. There are unbridgeable gaps between left and right.
We are at war, right? We're not debating Obamacare. We're not debating tax cuts. We're not debating the border. We're debating America, the very...
But all of you are now messengers. All of you are now part of the fight. All of you are the people who are going to go back to your campuses and convert 10 other people. You should always wear that target proudly on your back because they will come for you. And when they come for you, the only way those bullets are going to bounce off is if you're made of steel. Thanks so much.
Wow, I have to say, those are some very powerful speakers. They are doing a good job for those kids.
Yeah. Here's the new thing I learned at this conference is that there are now outside groups and a whole infrastructure fighting this war on American campuses. Like, the tinder is there for the fire for sure. People are ready for a crazy fight on all sides. But now there are a number of relatively new, big, well-funded national organizations like this one, like Turning Point USA, which are fanning the flames and spreading the fire.
And I would say that is what our program is about today. We're going to see this play out on one campus and see just how easy it is for these things to blow up into a huge, raging wildfire. But Zoe, before we get to that, what exactly happens at this conference?
The conference is for tactical advice on how to fight this war on campus. So, for example, invite a conservative speaker to campus.
You don't just have a right to bring people to campus. You don't just have a right to stand up yourself and speak out. I think you have an obligation.
Now, in some cases, a college will try to stop the speaker. They'll think they're too controversial or charge a big security fee for that speaker. And there's a panel for what to do if that happens. The panel is called Sue Your School 101, Knowing and Defending the First Amendment on Campus.
Anybody here from Wisconsin? Awesome. So we have sued your university system 7 times. So thanks. You guys are great.
There are panels like Socialism is for Suckers, 48 Liberal Lies, Was Jesus a Socialist?
I'm going to guess the answer to that is no.
It is no. He was not. At night, the nighttime activity was a protest. Basically, anti-Trumpers of West Palm Beach came out to protest this conference. And honestly, it seemed almost too perfect, as though the conference had planned it. They did not, but it just felt like a way to get your conservative jollies out by yelling about some of the stuff they've been talking about all day. There were these super eclectic chants like taxation is theft.
Taxation is theft! Taxation is theft! Taxation is theft!
This one is hard to hear. This girl in the back yells out, "How many genders are there?" This insistence from Turning Point kids that there are only 2 genders, that gets brought up a lot, and it feels kind of random. And I figured out it's kind of a battle cry for these kids on the right. They're just basically saying, you're irrational, to the left. Of course, that dismissal of transgender and non-binary people can and often does come across as incredibly hateful.
So they're chanting this stuff.
Yeah, and making videos. In fact, that was a big thing this conference seemed to be about, was making videos. How to make videos to fight back against the left on their campuses. There are a bunch of panels about that. The art of the click, how to make political viral content, things like that. The idea is, even if you're isolated on your campus, there's a huge network out there of conservative news that's hungry for the video and will tell your story.
If you have a cell phone, then you are now a reporter. If you are on a college campus, you have things that are worth covering.
This is Ben Shapiro, a big-name conservative speaker who also founded the Daily Wire.
I run a publication that has about 100 million page views a month. If you email me with your story, and we can verify it and check it, make sure it's true, we'll run with it. Right? And this is true for Fox News, this is true for Daily Caller, this is true for Breitbart, this is true for all of the major right-wing publications. And so granting exposure is the easiest way to bring shame to a lot of these folks who deserve it. And if you
At this other panel called Fighting the PC Police, this guy, Cabot Phillips, he's a clean-cut, 24-year-old guy. He's just adored. It seems like everyone in the session knows him, and both of his sessions were packed. He gave tips on exactly, step-by-step, how do you make an effective video on your phone?
As far as the video goes, we all know this. How do we film our videos, guys? Horizontal. Heck yeah. If you film your videos vertically, you are not worthy of love. And you're not a good person.
And Cabot is the media director with a news site whose entire purpose is to document and publicize liberalism run amok on campus. It's called Campus Reform. They pay conservative students at colleges across the country to be correspondents, scouring their campuses for stories. Some are small, like college Republicans' email list used to, quote, identify the racists, or college turns gym into man-free space.
I love that these sound like Onion headlines, but from a right-wing perspective.
I know, but these are real things that happen. Like, one of them was about students demanding free tampons in both men and women's bathrooms. They did this by painting their pants with fake blood stains. It's called a bleed in. That's a story.
And so all of these are basically conservatives writing about how crazy liberals are on their campuses or how hard it is to be a conservative on campus.
Right. One prime type of video that Cabot from Campus Reform talked about is one that you would take when, say, you're out with your little table and you're trying to sign people up for your Turning Point USA chapter on your campus. Like you're in the middle of the quad. And there's this thing that's come up on public universities lately that I just found out about recently. It's the free speech zone. The free speech zone is this area of campus where all political activity, any protest or political advocacy, it's confined to one area.
A lot of times people don't realize that it's completely unconstitutional.
And if you are tabling outside of the free speech zone, someone from the university may come up to you and tell you to move to the free speech zone. And that's your cue.
Whip your phone out. Start filming. Stay calm. Be polite. There's no need to be a jerk, but just ask them. I'm not saying I won't leave, but what will happen if I choose not to leave?
The very best video to get, it seems, the creme de la creme, this is the impression I got, it's filming triggered snowflakes. Like, you know a snowflake?
Yes, of course. A snowflake is a liberal who is easily offended.
Right, like say a right-wing student group's posters are torn down. They may be torn down by snowflakes who are triggered by those posters. Cabot plays this one super viral video of a girl in an audience at an event screaming, "Get your hate speech off our campus, get your hate speech off our campus." His point is that a snowflake can be triggered by your very existence on campus.
And they do this thing where they will just throw out name calling. That's the first tactic they use. They'll say, you're a racist, you're a bigot homophobe, you are a part of the patriarchy, whatever that means, you're all these things. And it kind of sucks getting called that. No matter how untrue it is, which it is untrue, no matter how untrue it is, it's still like, I don't really want to get called that on campus. So maybe I won't speak up because I don't want to have to deal with this. They don't just want you guys to be quiet. Okay? The left on your campus doesn't just want you to stop talking. They want you to completely be off of their campus because your ideas make them feel that unsafe.
He's right. A lot of people on the left do say that ideas on the right make them feel unsafe. So things can explode and get out of hand really quickly.
Well, today on our program, we see a brand new Turning Point recruit head out and try the things that Turning Point USA tells students to do and trains them to do. During this moment in our history where everybody assumes the absolute worst about each other, we watch this newbie head right into the thick of it. A sophomore, 19 years old when this starts. Our reporter for this story is somebody who knows this world well. He's been covering these fights on campus for the Chronicle of Higher Education. His name's Steve Kolowich. And let's just get right to it. Here he is.
Okay.
Nisha wanted to start a Turning Point chapter at her school after she went to her first conference,
Mhm.
the Young Women's Leadership Summit last summer.
Sound on.
Really powering the fact that the whole
Okay, got it.
Okay. Yeah, my final thing was just to show you that poster, Mark saying, the primary duty of the working class is to win the battle of democracy. And I'm just think, we're really facing that right now. I mean, democracy is real. I mean, not that we're living in a real democracy before, but it has really gotten worse. And there's so much money and so many resources out there being poured into it. It's really, I mean, Nancy McLean tried to, and on an upbeat note, I hope she's right, but it's just staggering when you start seeing how much is out there. And there's nothing even remotely comparable to that on the left. So anyway, my final thoughts. Thanks for putting up with me. And I'm sorry about kind of screwing up the sequence on the
That's okay. Well,
PowerPoint.
thank you, David. And I'm sure that you have sparked many thoughts and questions from our viewers. And let me point out that those of you who are watching this on YouTube have to send your questions by email to global.justice.cliff@gmail.com. And I'll monitor that and pass your questions on to those in the Zoom room. For those who are in the Zoom room, well, you can ask your questions directly. And I see we have a number of people who I'm sure will have much to contribute to the discussion. So raise your hand and unmute yourself. I will call first on Harry Targ.
Hi, David. This was a great program. I have one comment and a question that I have to wrap my head around. The comment is, at my former university, I was less worried about Turning Point than the campaign that was launched by our Board of Trustees and President to require a course for all students graduating on, quote, civics literacy. And civics literacy is about teaching students the virtues and resiliency of American political institutions. And ACTA prepared a report in 2015 recommending such civic literacy. So that's sort of more of a soft sell of the Turning Point message. So we might talk about that. But the bigger question I have, and as David knows, every time we would get together, he'd tell me I'd have to read this book. And finally I said, okay, I'll read this book. and I was converted as well. But someone of our age level sort of remembers the kinds of, what should I say, liberal capitalist institutions that so much shape policy and academic discourse. And I'm thinking of Brookings, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, the World Economic Forum, and so on. You know, in a sense, we talked about this as the Wall Street sector of the ruling class. And how do we factor that sector of the ruling class into our discussion of the influence of the Koch brothers? Or should we talk about fractions of the ruling class that have somewhat different outlooks and somewhat different tactics and strategy?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And by the way, Harry, since you're so involved in this too, when people are asking questions, Harry's can answer them too, you know. But on that one, yeah, I mean, I used to think they were balanced. You had these liberal, progressive, you know, think tanks and so on, and so institutions, and you had the conservative ones. But now it has just shifted so dramatically in terms of where the money is. Now, I do say, in fact, one of my articles on climate change, was arguing that, well, maybe there are some billionaires that are on the right side. And when you talk about something like climate change, maybe they will be part of the movement too. But they're just, and maybe some of those will take some action against this voter suppression and so on and so forth. But it just seems like they're just so outgunned, outspent, outnumbered right now. We could use all the allies we can get, but I wouldn't write them. Not all the billionaires are the Koch brothers, and they're not part of the network, but an awful lot of them are.
All right, Carl Davidson.
Oh, good. I just checked to see if I'm unmuted. I'm going to take a slightly different tack on this. I'm a big fan of McLean's and David Schweikert's too, and Harry Targ's. But I think one of the weaknesses of the left is that when it comes to these questions a lot, we think vertically. In other words, we look up and we're trying to get a handle on what's going on at the top. Now, as a devotee of this, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But I think in order to answer the kind of challenge that Nancy MacLean put to us, we have to look horizontally. And what do I mean by this? I think one of the most important things we can do, and for many leftists, it's the most difficult thing to do, is to build a Democratic club in your neighborhood. It sounds very simple, but I doubt if half of the people on this call have done such a thing. And the reason why it's so important is because that is the basic building block that we need to defeat these guys. If we don't have it, we're not going to be able to defeat them. There's a book out we're using for political education here in Beaver County. It's called They've Got Money. It's a pretty good book. It covers the last 40 years of politics from a left progressive point of view. But it comes from a slogan: we've got people, but they've got money. So, but do we have people? There's a lot of people who are in agreement with us, but if they are not organized at the base, it doesn't count. If you want to win elections and strikes, you don't need to build a movement, you need to build campaigns. And the campaigns have to have basic building blocks. In other words, you have to organize on your street, in your neighborhood, a democratic club for democracy and justice. And it has to, join AOC's Justice Democrats to build up that faction of the Democratic Party till it's so powerful that it causes a crisis. And that's going to be the way that we're going to be able to combat the right on the state level. Because unless you have this organization on your local level, your township or your city or your town, you're not going to be able to impact your state house, because your state house doesn't pay attention to, whether you've signed some petition about, some piece of national legislation. They pay attention to the votes that you're able to assemble in your district, in your precincts, and so on. And if you have them, you have clout. If you don't have them, you don't, and they will win. So thinking horizontally as well as vertically, that's the most difficult thing to do, to convince people that they have to form justice and democratic or solidarity and democracy clubs in their neighborhoods, and then to use these not only to get out the vote, but to also do street heat and other things. So I think that's the lesson that I draw from both David and Nancy's analysis.
You want to comment on that, David, or Harry?
Well, I mean, I certainly think it's important, sure, and again, we don't have the kind of resources, but there are organizations out there trying to do these things. There's the Sunrise Movement. There's actually an interesting one we just discovered recently here in this area, Faith in Action. It's a lot of progressive religious people and churches and so on campaigning, for candidates. I mean, these local elections are very important, local, state and local elections. It was very interesting to see that. It was also interesting to see there was a big demonstration of that. We went out and spent hours and hours and hours over a couple of days putting literature on people's doorknobs and things like that. And then they were going to have a final rally with speakers. And suddenly this other group comes in claiming to represent, the teachers union or one of the unions, and totally disrupted it. I mean, and it was very carefully put together, lots of African Americans on it. I mean, it was like 10 or 15 people, but I mean, this was clearly organized and clearly the right keeping track of these left organizations and so on. All I could think of was the Koch brothers and Nancy McLean when this happened. I would never have expected a rally like this with all these progressives suddenly to be disrupted, and shut it down. I mean, the thing ended because they had a bullhorn, you couldn't shout over them and so on and so forth. And anyway, but no, it's absolutely right. We've got to be organized, and that voter turnout is absolutely crucial because, McLean is right. None of these policies that the right is supporting really has popular support, across the country. They've got to be disguised. They got to keep our people divided and so on and so forth, stir up these other issues. And they're really good at that. They're pouring a lot of money into figuring out how to frame these issues and how to send out, these mass mailings and how to knock on people's doors. And we're up against something, but we've got to do it. Absolutely.
I'd like to add a comment on that. Organizing horizontally, locally. That's basically what the right has been doing, having gotten control of state governments in so many states.
Yep.
They are also becoming increasingly active at the local level, disrupting school board meetings,
yep.
Trying to take over the local electoral commission so that they can nullify electoral results that they don't like. So they're very active at all levels, and clearly that's what the left needs to do as well.
Yeah, just an example of that, actually, right here in Oak Park Heights, Minnesota, there was a big school board. The Stillwater area school board was pushing for a levy to increase their funding because one that they'd had was expiring. Okay, give money to the schools of people that need it and so on and so forth. And suddenly there were these right wingers knocking on people's doors and saying, no, cut it off. These schools aren't any good. They're teaching these kinds of courses, but they were doing it. Their thing was no more tax, stop the taxation don't raise taxes, that kind of thing, the school board's just wasting, the school system's wasting all its money doing things they shouldn't be doing. So yeah, it's definitely at that level. They're organized, they got money. I mean, I'm sure they had money coming in, advice and so on and so forth. But that's got to be countered.
Here is a question that just came in by email from Jürgen Allers, who asks, we need students for a democratic society now more than ever. What efforts do you see, David, for such a movement rebirth on campuses? And that would be a good question for Carl also, as a former president of SDS back in the 60s.
Well, I mean, that was interesting at Loyola my last year there. I've been retired now for 2 years, but yeah, there was more student activism. There was a new socialist organization on campus. It was a conglomeration of DSA and other people, getting recognized as an official student organization. There was an organization in support of the non-tenured track faculty trying to form a union and trying to get benefits and so on. I mean, there was more. I said when I left, I saw more activism this year than I had, probably in my 40 years at Loyola. It was really quite something and inspiring. Now, I don't know. That was 2 years ago. I'm not quite sure what's going on campuses now. But if surely one of the big issues is climate change. I mean, people of that generation realize, my God, their future is on the line here. That's why the Sunrise Movement has, really done a lot of good work there. And it's got to translate into, turning out the vote and getting control of, the system. And again, we don't have nearly the amount of money. We got to count on people turning out, coming out, working, knocking on doors.
I think we have to do much better than SDS. Frankly, we have we already have it in a sense that we have DSA. DSA is as large as SDS ever was. It's better organized, and even as white as DSA was, it has more African American members than SDS ever did. I could count the Black members of SDS on my fingers. We had a tight relationship with the Black Panther Party and SNCC, but that didn't still really make up for the problem. But the point I want to make is that there was a default position underlying the politics of SDS and a lot of the politics since then up to the present day. And it's what I call street syndicalism. It's the sort of sub rosa, subtext default politics of the left. And that is, we build a movement and then you get masses of people to storm, have a big march on Washington and put this heat on your state houses and so on. And you pressure the liberals to do the right thing. In other words, you avoid politics. You avoid building the political machinery that you need to take over county politics, to take over your township politics, to take over your city government. So I pose the question to people these days. I said, what is your strategy to take over the city council of Pittsburgh or Chicago or, St. Louis, Missouri? What is your strategy? And most people look at me glassy-eyed. They don't, number one, they don't have one. Number two, they haven't really thought about it. I said, because if you don't have a strategy about how to take over your local government, the far right does. And if you don't have a strategy, you're part of their strategy. So I think we have to reject and learn to see, if not reject, at least we have to learn to see that the street syndicalism that's underneath SDS and all up to the Sunrise Movement, if we see that as problematic. We have to build political machines, machines that can get out votes in large numbers, machines that are rooted in neighborhoods, that have organizations. We have to be organization builders, not movement builders. Movements are elemental. Capitalism in its outrages will cause a movement to rise by killing somebody. And the movement it's an elemental rising. And our job is to build campaigns and organizations within it. And we have to build them from the bottom up. If you haven't won it at the base, you rarely get it at the top.
There are some other professors or former professors, recently professors at different universities here in the Zoom room. Any of you want to comment on what's going on campuses? I've been away from campus for too many years. I'm curious.
So am I. I mean, again, those polls are showing that those people in that age group really are, I mean, those are the ones that are having problems with capitalism and so on and so forth. But, but there, again, there's, what do you do about it? There is this kind of sense of, we don't know, there's, I mean, it used to be there were organizations you could join, well, of course, obviously at one point it was the Communist Party, but, then a lot of left parties and so on and organizations, and there aren't those anymore around, I'm not quite sure.
Or even the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party's a hollow shell.
Right. Definitely join the party and get involved that way. That probably is the best way to go. Yeah.
Well, or DSA, which is works with the Democratic Party, but separate from it. That probably is the closest to an organized mass base that we see on the left these days.
Mm-hmm.
I guess if it's all right, I'll respond to the question that you asked about campuses with a personal anecdote. I went through the tenure process some years ago, and I had a couple faculty members who vehemently disagreed with my politics. So for an outside reviewer, one of them found a scholar by the name of Kenneth Arrow. And I don't know if any of you might be familiar with that name, but he's a sidekick, or at least at that time was a sidekick of James Buchanan. It came out of that whole public choice orientation. So it came close to sinking my tenure bid. The only reason I survived was I had a sympathetic dean, and the dean had the ear of the provost, but otherwise they would have gotten rid of me. And this was, 35 some years ago at that point. Anyway, I'd like to move, if I might, to a general question for the presentation and the audience today, which is, I'm curious about the relationship between what Nancy MacLean and David Schweikert both talked about, which is sort of libertarian sway or influence shaping our national political agenda down to the state and local levels and so forth and so on. That set of relationships with what we might call the burgeoning or emerging, at least, fascist or neo-fascist orientation. The reason being because ideologically, these are two supposedly opposing tendencies. I mean, if you're a hardcore fascist, you believe in the state and you believe in state action. Now, I've seen some contradictions with that. I live in the state of Florida, and I'm sure everybody here has heard of our illustrious governor. And I think he fits probably within the ALEC and Koch framework somewhere fairly centrally. But he's used the state to interfere with private business to some extent. So, he's sort of an ideological libertarian, I suppose, but he and others like him don't seem to be averse to using the state to advance that agenda. So that's kind of my broader question. I'd like to toss that out and see what people think about it.
Well, I think, the libertarian is a guy, in a sense, a guise. I mean, yeah, anytime you can use the state to further the interests of the wealthy, they're going to be supported. You know, you want to save freedom, you want to, because that's kind of, you can make a broad appeal to that. You don't want the government interfering with you and controlling your life and making you wear masks and making you get vaccinated and all this kind of stuff. Stir people up. Whereas, Donald Trump got vaccinated and he was wearing, he didn't like to wear it in public, but, he wasn't taking any chances. But that's part of the strategy, because the radical right, they're a small group, they've got to pitch themselves to a broader audience. That's why this alliance with the evangelicals, hardcore libertarians were atheists, right? Ayn Rand, for example, and so on and so forth. But no, you will recognize they will support Donald Trump, and so on, because he'll stand up for you. You feel embattled, you feel being sneered upon by these, elites in the big cities and so on and so forth. So, have God sent Donald Trump. That's what a lot of them were saying, to help us, to save us, from this onslaught, of secularism and so on and so forth. Also, when Carl was talking about organizing, but what about small towns and rural areas? Talk radio has been taken over, by those organizations, and now there's not as many voters there, but they all feel beleaguered, they feel looked down upon, and so on and so forth. So there's the politics of resentment is very powerful in the base, and it's just manipulated. That's why the Koch strategy. You've really got to have a long-term strategy. You set up these institutions. You figure out how to, what buttons to push. What groups you should target in what ways, and so on and so forth. The people that know their own interest, and that's why they were worried about seeing this massive amount of wealth being accumulated. Well, get that out of people's minds, get them to think about something else. The wealthy people can be good for you, I don't know.
I think
they're worried, and there's reason to be worried, but they've got a strategy.
I think the answer to your question is somewhat suggested in McLean's book. It doesn't go back to Buchanan. It really goes back to see the essence of it and how that circle was squared. It goes back to John C. Calhoun as the grandfather of neoliberalism. John C. Calhoun was a firm believer in the state, but in a way, his idea of the state, his idea of the perfect polity, was the slave plantation, where it was a community, and the owner of it ruled. And the state, to the extent that it existed to defend his community and to defend against majority votes against it. He was not for numerical majorities. He had a dance theory he called the concurrent majority, which basically allowed any minority, by that he meant slave owners, to have a veto power over any numerical majority. The only way that they could be brought into agreement was with a concurrent majority, which was a broad consensus building kind of majority where everybody sort of, brought into it. The closest example I could think was Lyndon Johnson in '64. But so otherwise, the fascists, you have to remember, the real fascists are revolutionaries. They believe in the state. They are revolutionaries. They want to overthrow the existing state, and they will opportunistically use anything, libertarianism or whatever, to further their aims. But they're very much in favor of gaining a monopoly of organized violence, which is a core definition of what the state is. So I think, if you look back to John C. Calhoun, you'll see the hybrid of libertarianism and a kind of collectivism.
That's reflected in what today is called neoliberalism.
Right.
And neoliberalism is often presented as the belief in minimum government, let the market decide. But the dirty secret of neoliberalism is that the state is there to ensure that the market operates to the benefit of the wealthy. It's a point that David Harvey makes in his book, The Short History of Neoliberalism, that really neoliberalism is a class project of capital. And as such, it certainly does advocate state action. But I saw that Fred has been trying to get in. Do you want to go back to the question of the campus scene or on the ideological?
I'll do both.
Okay.
I'm doing some research for a talk on student activism on my campus in Baltimore in the late 60s and early 70s. And it's been a lot of fun. I was at UMBC in 68, but I just wanted to mention that I think Carl's description of street syndicalism really does describe what was going on at UMBC, at that time. There's a lot of activism, but it was really disorganized, and as Carl was talking about. But I want to mention something else. At the beginning of the Biden administration, I was actually surprised that Biden was advocating for some of the policies he was advocating for, both bills that are being discussed now, one being passed. And I started to wonder if we were in some, or moving towards some post-neoliberal phase.
Yes, we are.
And it's a little hard to describe, but the kind of old, or not old, but the standard neoliberalism critique certainly is not consistent with some of the Democratic Party, at any rate, trying to argue to use the state that actually would help people. To some extent. That wouldn't get rid of capital, but it would help people. So I wondered what people thought about this possible post-neoliberalism.
Neoliberalism is exhausted, at least certainly on a domestic level. And that's what they've come up against. And so they've had to, Biden has had to go, into a kind of a neo-FDR mode with its various proposals, because there's no neoliberal solutions. There, you can't handle COVID, you can't handle climate, you can't handle any of the major problems that we face with neoliberal solutions, and neoliberalism is exhausted. So something new is going to happen. Whether it's going to be a kind of rainbow social democracy, which I hope it is, I don't know, but something new is taking shape.
Harry.
Yeah, I'm sorry to shift the focus. I want to say something and then ask a question. One of the, for me, most vivid parts of Nancy MacLean's book is her description of Chile. Milton Friedman and the Chicago Boys went to Chile around 1976 and advocated for so-called free markets. And then she says James Buchanan went to Chile around 1979, and he told Pinochet to change the rules, right? So they wrote a constitution that was designed to limit majority rule. And in her talk today that we watched, she made some comment about shifting from who's chosen to what the rules are. And, and that's very interesting and important. And at the risk of embarrassing Jay, I would love to hear a little summary of the University of Florida kerfuffle of the last week or two, which seemingly has led to a victory for faculty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want me to go ahead and comment on that or?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
please.
Okay. Well, first, I'm not at the University of Florida. I retired from the University of Central Florida. So I don't have direct firsthand experience. The experience I do have is mostly through my faculty union, United Faculty of Florida. And while I was at the University of Central Florida, I was a chapter officer in virtually every capacity of the local chapter. And in their wisdom, the state union created a retirement chapter, which I joined as soon as I possibly could. So that keeps me on all the contact lists for what they're doing. And that's kind of where my information is coming from, apart from the local media. The union, I'm pleased to say, has been very active. And so this sort of fits with what Nancy McLean was talking about, and David Schweikert as well, of local base building and community efforts. Carl Davidson, too, of course. So I think probably most of you have heard the contours of the story, that there were 3 faculty members who were prevented, or who were told by university administration that they could not testify on legislation that had to do with voting rights because it conflicted with state interest, quote unquote. So that's when the pushback started, and it's been some pretty good pushback. I think this is one of which we all should be fairly proud. With the union in the forefront, but with a variety of other actors, the University of Florida administration and the Board of Trustees has been bombarded with objections to their action. Now, one other thing I'll toss in that might not have been picked up by everyone is the Board of Trustees. The University of Florida is governed, like a lot of universities, by a board. The chair of the board is a major developer in the state of Florida. He's a friend of Ron DeSantis, the governor, which is how he got appointed to the board. And so they haven't really created a paper trail directly back to DeSantis yet, although I suspect that might be coming. But it's close enough that it was his appointee who seems to have had the lion's share of the influence on this act that the university has taken. Since then, I've seen allegations that the feds might actually be investigating the situation, because if you look at the prevailing federal statute in this area of the law, it talks about witness tampering. So the allegation is that by their action, the university administration has actually tampered with testimony from experts in an official proceeding, which is what the U.S. Code specifically prohibits. So I want to see where that goes.
It's great.
There's also been found that the University of Florida has additionally, or I should say previously, exercised sanctions against faculty further back. At least 3 other faculty members have come forward and said they've been told the same thing. So, the snowball is still kind of building in that regard. But I guess the end of the summary for now, at least, is that due to all this pressure that's been brought, they backpedaled. The University of Florida has rescinded the prohibition. I guess I should also say that one of the linchpin issues for them was payment. But of course, us as faculty members know that typically we are compensated when we provide our expert testimony in a legal proceeding. I mean, that's not unusual. That's what the University of Florida has claimed, that, well, because they're being paid, that sets up a conflict of interest, and we have the right to be able to deny our faculty and staff going forward and providing any sort of paid testimony. So they've been forced to back off from all of that, at least for the time being. And this is not a finished story yet. So we're going to see how other shoes may continue to drop with it.
I find it interesting that the university adopts this view that it is somehow or another the representative of the state, and that the governor is the state. A university is not a representative of any political institutions.
Well, let me interrupt on that.
Nor are its faculty members, when they speak, representing the state. Yes, Jay.
Well, some years ago when Jeb Bush was governor, he got a law passed that basically said that the state university system is not really a creature of the state, that somehow it's separate and distinct from the state. So now what they're trying to do, and I haven't actually seen this brought out yet. I suspect if stuff goes to court, this is going to get brought out. But meanwhile, they're trying to have it both ways, in essence. Say, well, you're not really creatures of the state, but when we think you are, then you are creatures of the state.
Okay, other comments or questions, anyone? On this matter of voter suppression, which across the country, laws are being passed by state legislatures to suppress the vote, I'm surprised that no one has brought to our attention the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. In Section 2 to the 14th Amendment, it says very clearly, when the right to vote at any election or is denied to any extent, then the number of representatives from that state in Congress shall be reduced proportionally. Well, hey, if they succeed in suppressing the vote, then some of these states ought to lose some of their seats in Congress, shouldn't they?
They're not denying people the right to vote. They're just making it really hard to do so. So they're, they got all these lawyers lined up. They'll handle that.
Well, certainly not being denied, but it says in any way abridged. And voter suppression laws, making it more difficult for people to vote, does abridge the vote. That's their intention.
Well, that's the intention, but if they're skirting the law, I think. Absolutely, that's the intention. That's a big issue. That voter suppression is a huge thing. And, the Republican Party can't win without it. So that's why they're really doing it. And that's why they got the states. The states get to make a lot of these laws and so on, take over the states, get those laws in place and so on and so forth. And then, God forbid, don't let the Biden law, the voter suppression, anti-voter suppression law get passed by the Republicans, as they've even said, we can't possibly win, if voting is made easy.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that seems to be happening is that the Democrats seem like they keep showing up at a hardball game with a softball. The other instance that comes to my mind is this business about Steve Bannon and his refusal to respond to the subpoena. The House referred this matter to the Justice Department, whereas under the Constitution, they could directly indict Bannon themselves. Instead, sending it through the Department of Justice draws out the process at very best. Why do they keep doing stuff like this? They don't understand what the presentation that you folks made this afternoon, that this is a real hard brass knuckles kind of fight that's going on here, and you're not going to win it by again, mixing my metaphors, bringing the softball to the hardball game.
Well, before we go to any final comments, because we have gone over time, I did want to make one general observation. Thinking about all that the Koch network has been doing illustrates the power of wealth. The billionaires, their wealth not only enables them to lobby, but also to change the political institutions of the society and to build counter institutions. And that's what David and Nancy McLean have been pointing to, that basically capital is winning.
Yeah, even as the gap between rich and poor and rich and ordinary people gets larger and larger and just keeps exploding, it's how to convert that money into votes, or not allowing votes. I mean, whatever, and again, that was one thing about McLean. This is very smart people here trying to think long-term, coming up with strategies for doing all of this, it's minority. How does a small minority dominate, the vast majority? That's the problem they're up against, and they're trying to succeed at that so far. Well, it's not over. Game isn't over yet. The game, but Marx is right. We've got to win the battle of deferred democracy. Marx is right.
Well, that's a good closing word. Thank you, David. I want to thank David and Nancy McLean for your contributions, as well as all of the others who participated in this discussion. It's been a very, very interesting discussion. I enjoyed it, and I hope our audience did as well. Today's webinar, as well as past programs, are available on YouTube and accessible from our website, globaljusticecenter.org. And now, let me call your attention to next week's webinar, when Harry will be back with us again, along with Dan Morris, talking about ideological hegemony and higher education, ideas as material forces. Hope to see you again next Monday at 1:00. And now I want to close by thanking our webinar team, Roberto Robles, Liz Mestres, Gregory Diamant, Olivia Canales, and myself. And this is Cliff Durand signing off until next Monday.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, David.